few more study sheets back there in the back, I think, if you haven't had a chance to get those. One of the things I find interesting about this couple of chapters that we're studying is generally when we think of the laws that are in the Old Testament, the laws of which the covenant consists, we usually think of the Ten Commandments. And they're generally fairly general, I guess generally very general. But I mean, they're not real specific. We're told to not kill or to not murder. And we come to understand that a little bit better by what? By the kind of things we read here in this development of these laws. And so we find out that there's different ways of looking at killing. And there's discussions here about testimony that you may make as a witness. You know, all these things are there, again, part of the things which are the Ten Commandments, but yet it gives us more details about them. And so I ask you, for those of you who've had a chance to look at it, from Exodus 23, 1 through 9, pick what you think is the most interesting of these sundry laws. That's what they're entitled, so we call them that. And so I'm going to read through those, and I know that's kind of a strange question, to ask. You tell me what you find interesting about these particular ones. There's a few that I thought were kind of interesting, a little bit different, and I think are worthy of our consideration. But it says, "You shall not bear a false witness or false report. Do not join your hand with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. You shall not follow the masses in doing evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute as to turn aside after the multitude in order to pervert justice. Nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his dispute. If you meet your enemy's ox, I guess you could have an enemy ox, but in this case, that's not what it is. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey wandering away, you shall surely return it to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying helpless under its load, you shall refrain from leaving it to him. You shall surely release it with him." I want you to think about that one. "You shall not pervert justice or the justice due to your needy brother in his dispute. Keep far from a false charge, and do not kill the innocent or the righteous, for I will not acquit the guilty. You shall not take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and subverts the cause of the just. You shall not oppress a stranger, since you yourselves know the feelings of a stranger, for you are also strangers in the land of Egypt." Now, if you had a chance to look at this, the reason, of course, why I ask you to pick out the ones you find to be most interesting is that you got to read them to come to the conclusion of what might be interesting. So I didn't ask you any specific, go to verse 4 and fill in the blank or anything like that. So any thoughts on anything here that you find interesting? Go ahead, Janine.
What stuck out to me was verse 7, "Stay away from a false man."
Okay. So did you read the whole verse?
Yes.
Okay, well, let me read mine here. "Keep far from a false charge, and do not kill the innocent or the righteous, for I will not acquit the guilty." So that wasn't in the translation that you have? The tail end of that? Anyway, it doesn't matter. So keep from, what do you mean? So what do you think that means, Janine?
Stay away from things that aren't right.
Okay. And there can be temptation. I mean, this is what it's talking about here, to actually offer your word or your support or your testimony, and you might lie about it. You might lie about it if what happens? What about the bribe? Yeah, if it's going to benefit you, and of course that's, if you choose to lie and you've been bribed to tell falsehood, well then, that truly is something that is a benefit to you, and that's wrong. What else? What other ones anything you notice in there?
Can you explain verse 5?
Just a second. Yeah, I'll give that a shot in a second. Do you have your hand up, Jeff? Yeah, it is the most interesting, I think. It's because, for one reason, ox and donkeys, or oxen and donkeys, are pretty big deals back here in this culture when it's mostly agricultural. And they were very, very significant pieces of ownership for a family. Okay, so let's look at it. He says, if you see the donkey of one who hates you lying helpless, let's see. Well, let's go back to verse 4, because there's a little bit of a comparison here. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey wandering away, you shall surely return it to him. So what's the rule here?
Even if it's your enemy's ox, you return it.
Okay, so how does that sound to you? I mean, is that the way a lot of people would look at that? Yeah, right. And I don't like that guy anyway. And so, tough luck. Yeah, so it is. It's an unusual thing. Now, when you're trying to maintain peace amongst all the people, you need to do the best you can to try to treat everyone fairly, even somebody who's in the camp next door making a lot of noise or something like that. But go ahead, Larry.
Bringing it into kind of more contemporary thought. When you see somebody out on the road, whether they're a friend or not a friend, most times they're not. You see somebody pushing a vehicle or they're out of gas. I think our first incline is to help.
Right.
As a safety reason, we have to be careful.
Yeah.
In today's culture and society.
Yeah, because we might be found to be liable for some damages or something like that if we do it.
Yeah, and you're in a company vehicle,
Yeah, so
I'm not allowed to help other people.
Sure.
So my heart says do it.
Right.
I can't do it.
Yeah, that puts you in a very interesting predicament, doesn't it? Particularly for someone who wants to do the right thing. Now, okay, so I think it's a general. Go ahead, Roger. Yeah, I think that's very central to this, isn't it? Because, I mean, if you've got an ox and you're my friend, and, naturally I'm going to say, hey, Roger, you lost your ox, I've got it, come over and get it, or something like that. But if you're my enemy, then I may be thinking selfishly about it. And so that's not the way God wants me to think about my enemy. Correct? Okay. All right, what else? Well, let's go on down to the next part, because I guess that's the most interesting. If you see the donkey of one who hates you, so that's pretty straightforward, who's lying helpless under its load, you shall refrain from leaving it to him. Okay, so are we assuming that it's talking about the owner, the him? I think that's probably what it is. All right, it says, you shall surely release it, but with him. Okay, so what's the difference here?
You got to go fetch him to bring him to the scene
And why is that?
so that he won't think you took it or something.
Well, that's true. Okay, but let's look at it from the point of view of something he may have done wrong. Go ahead, Carol.
Well, I was also thinking the kindness to the animal. I mean, the animal's trapped under this burden. Why would you spitefully not help the animal just because you don't like the owner?
Right. In fact, you may have some consideration here about, well, how did this happen? This may have been cruelty here to the animal. And so, what are you going to do in that situation? So what should you do? Well, you shall not what? You shall refrain from leaving it to him. Why? He might not care. Go ahead, Tam. Okay, you kind of lost me on the last half of that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's just say it's your donkey, and let's say I don't like you, and there's this poor donkey lying there, and it's got a huge weight over the top of you, and so on top of himself, the donkey. And Now, what might be my reaction to that if I saw that? What do we call it? Cruelty to animals? Would you think that that's under consideration here? Okay, I think it probably is. So, go ahead. Oh, sorry, Dan.
It gives you more ammunition against the guy you don't like. And on top of everything else, look how he treats his animals.
Yeah, okay, so Dana says it may just give you more ammunition against this guy you don't like. But, so what do you do? See, what we often look at is, okay, you go find a police person of some kind. Okay, but you don't do that. Go ahead.
Well, I was going off of what Tammy said. She's making the point where it says we're not to leave it with them. We're showing that we are compassionate to
Right.
what's going on, and we are willing to, even though I don't like you,
Right.
and you're not my favorite person, I'm not going to leave this here. I am
Yeah.
going to show you that I am the better person.
Okay, and I would say possibly he's going to go with him for what reason? Does everybody? Oh, okay, maybe I'm just the only underhanded human being here. But okay, I go with that individual because I'm going to make sure that he takes care of that donkey. That's why I'm going with him. I'm not just going to let him go off on his way because, I'm thinking this, there's some cruelty to this animal that has happened. And so I'm not going to just say, okay, it's yours. That's what I'm supposed to do with enemies. I give them back their animal. So, but no, I'm going to go with you, as it says there. You shall surely release it with him. Okay, so you help him get it out. And then I think what you're doing there is you're helping him uncover, what is a problem. And then you also may be in a position where you can maybe help and make sure that the animal is taken care of. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, another aspect about this too is we're told to love our enemies, pray for those that curse you. We're supposed to be there to help them. For what purpose?
Mm-hmm.
We might turn them from an enemy to a friend. And if this person's in trouble,
Yeah.
we're there to help them. It's amazing. Sometimes you can turn that enemy into a friend.
Well, and I think oftentimes that it does, at least if there's a problem, some sort of tension, it might ameliorate that tension. And so you're going in the right direction. And it might be the same as you're heaping coals upon his head, too. That same principle there out of Proverbs. Yeah, go ahead, Tammy. You're going to have to speak up a little, Tammy. No, that's right. It's the other person's, but the person sees what's going on here, and so he feels a sense of responsibility toward the welfare of the donkey. I think that's the right conclusion. Okay, what else? Any other real interesting ones in there? Or ones that you might think of as being not something you'd expect to be mentioned in the Old Testament, because again, we kind of get caught up with just the Ten Commandments, and we don't realize that there are details to this law. Go ahead, James.
I think with all of these, they all encompass around the key issue of love thy neighbor as thyself.
Okay.
And so, all of these things you would abstain from if you do love your neighbors as yourself. And I think it goes with the whole thing about, specifically with the donkey and all that, is that
Mm-hmm.
how you're supposed to view your enemy as well. And
Right.
because these acts are, particularly helping your enemy, are acts of kindness, which can change things.
Yeah.
And then all these other things that are mentioned here are just lead to corruption and
Okay.
things to abstain from.
What about the poor person? Anyone got any thoughts about that? Because how would one expect? Who was talking over here? I heard somebody. Go ahead, Kenny.
That's the one I was going to mention, just because normally anything mentioning a poor person in the Bible is you going to their aid. But
Yeah.
that was an interesting point, just to show that just because they're unfortunate doesn't mean they're always in the right.
Yeah, yeah, I know, and especially like verse 9. Read verse 9, Kenny. Again, since I've already read it again.
You shall not oppress a stranger, since you yourself know the feeling of a stranger, for you also were strangers in the land of Egypt.
Okay, so there's that downtrodden. There's a stranger. Remember who you were, and how your country, how you as a nation, as you were, as much as you were then, how you were treated. Remember that. Okay, so that's a reality. and that I think God expects that, but then there's still this sense of, he doesn't say you shall be partial to a poor man in his dispute. It doesn't say that, does it? Okay, so this seems like it's more important, sometimes to make sure the truth is told, that you have a great responsibility, and that rises above, a person who's wealthy and a person who's poor. And so, what is that in terms of how we're handling the law? I don't want to put you on a spot, Tyler, back there, but when you have someone in your presence and there's some question as to what this person has done, how do you go about determining whether they've done something?
Talk to them, try to find witnesses, any evidence leading to either their arrest.
Yeah, and you're being as objective as you possibly can, because the law is the law. Okay, so I think it's important to understand that truthfulness is very much a part of loving your neighbor, because maybe this situation doesn't arise all that much. A situation like this. But if it does, make sure that everybody understands that what holds us together here and keeps us away from our throats of our neighbor is by knowing that the law is being put out there and it is being defended. Because once that stops, as we've discussed this, once that stops in a culture, then things really begin to get chaotic and begin to break down. Any other thoughts about these laws? Go ahead, Susan.
In verse 1, it says, "Do not join your hand with a wicked man to be a malicious witness." And I just think that really points out the matter in the heart. Even though it would be good to put a bad person away, if the only reason you're doing anything with that wicked person is so that you can maliciously be a witness against them.
Yeah, so that's kind of the flip side of this. If it's a poor person who's done it, then the poor person must have to pay the price. And the same thing can be said of another person who's not so poor. Okay, good point. What else? Anything else? Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
While we're talking about these laws and so forth, I'm continually reminded that these are God's people.
Right.
God is instilling in them the idea of loving your neighbor as yourself,
Mm-hmm.
being fair, being just, and all these things. Not only the fact that God is fighting for his people, so watch out when God's people come in, don't mess with them because
Sure.
they're God's people.
Right.
But the character of God's people has to be above what was
Right.
the standard in
Right.
society.
Yeah.
Because of God.
Right.
God represented through them.
Yeah, and I think it's very typical, what's the most important thing we're supposed to do? Well, we know as far as the 2 commandments, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And so, someone says, well, what's really important? Well, it's love. But yet we're not really quite sure how we're supposed to define it. Whereas, God wants us to make judgments in regards to this, and that's exactly what he shows here. This is what it means to love people. This is what it means to treat people with honor. So the details are important. And I think that that's very, very significant here, because we want to make these things so unmeaningful. Oh, let's just all love one another. Well, okay, you're going to have to tell me what that means. Because God explains it here. He doesn't just say, yeah, love your enemies. He says, no, wait a minute. What about the donkey and the ox? And they happen to get in the way of the situation. It's important to understand that God is trying to help us to understand what it does mean to be just. And I think that's, to me, what's kind of exciting about that. But let's go ahead. We could belabor that point another 15 or 20 minutes, and that wouldn't help a whole lot. Number 2, it says, according to 23:10 and 11, what should be done in one's land in the 7th year of a 7-year cycle? Now, this shows the concern for the poor. Let's go ahead and read this. Mona, could you read it? Verse 10 and 11. And then, Roger, would you read 12 and 13? Go ahead, Mona. chapter 23. Correct.
You shall sow your land for 6 years and gather in its yield. But on the seventh year you shall let it rest to my Sabbath. For that ye of your people may eat, and whatever they beast of the field may eat. You are to do the same when you are my vineyard and your olive grove.
Okay, so how does that help define how you love someone in this particular instance? You're providing for the poor. Yes, you've done really well for those 6 years, but in the seventh year, then you leave your fields to the poor. Go ahead, Roger.
6 days you shall do your work, but on the seventh day you shall rest. That your ox and your donkey may have rest, and the son of your servant woman and the aliens may be refreshed. Pay attention to all I have said to you, and make no mention of the names of other gods, nor let it be heard on your lips.
Okay, so that gets stuck in here, this idea of you're going into a country, a realm, where there's going to be a lot of false gods. So while we're on the subject of how we treat one another, let's just make sure we're not worshiping false gods along with that, because that's not going to get us in the right direction. It tends to take us in a more lusty, sort of fleshly approach, and then that's where people start taking advantage of other people. You can go ahead and read Leviticus 25, 1 through 7 on your own. That just gives a little bit more background to it. We don't know exactly how that all was worked out. It certainly was going to be a law after they got out of the wilderness, but it could be a very useful thing as they're moving along at this particular point in time. Okay. From 23:20 through 23, what was the purpose of God's angel? Now, this is one of those somewhat ill-defined beings, which is a part of what is leading the people through their wilderness wanderings. And so what was the purpose, then, of God's special angel here? Okay, a keeper or a protector. He will guard you, I think it says. And then he's going to make sure you get to your destination. So, again, this is one of the things that's so demonstrative of what God is doing for these people. God is doing everything possible to make sure they get to where they're going. And this angel, some have suggested that it's Christ in the Old Testament. And some hold rather strongly to that. I don't, you might draw the conclusion by some sort of inference, but I don't ever find it to be that positive. All I know is that God has angels, and it means over in Hebrews chapter 2 that there's more than one, and they're doing what? They're doing whatever God wants them to do. And so here in this situation, they've got this angel, and so what's it going to be accomplishing? Janine gave the general answer to that. It says, you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless you, your bread and your water, and I will remove sickness from your midst. So what does he say though in verse 23? He says, my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will completely destroy them. So this role that's mentioned here of this angel seems to be more of what here? What about all the ites we just went through? These would be the people who live there, and they're the people who are not going to want the people of Israel to live there. So what's the angel going to do? It's going to defeat them. All right, now, when we grasp this principle of their trust and their faith in God, this is always, at this point, a little bit stunning to me because, God's just laid it all out there. What else has he said about how things are going to go?
Said he's going to send bees in that are running
Yeah, it calls them hornets, but something that's going to make life very, very difficult for these people, whether it may be figurative, some people say it is. But the point is, the work's going to be done for you. And then I think kind of an interesting thing there is what's found in verse 26. Let's see. Jack, would you read that, please? Verse 26 of chapter 23.
There shall be no one miscarrying or barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days.
Okay, so what's the promise there? I mean, this is just like gravy, to me, and what he's saying here. I'm going to fight your victories, and on top of it, you're going to have babies, and it. Sorry? Your numbers are going to grow when it seems like maybe in a situation like this they may not. Okay, so I'm going to completely take care of you again. So you say, why is it that God has these people who seem to not be willing to really trust him, despite all the promises? Now, this being true, all right, let's try to look at this, because there is a point over in chapter 24 where after Moses has gone up to the mountain and he reads them the law, and it says, then he took the book, this is verse 7, the book of the covenant, and read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, what? All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. All right, now, I just want you to think about this one and talk about it a little bit if you like. But what causes people to get to this particular way of thinking, and what then causes them to not maintain this way of thinking? I mean, they've gotten great news. They've had this incredible experience where Moses goes up on the mountain. It's pretty amazing what's happened. Go ahead, Mitch.
I think it's probably emotion, right?
Yeah.
Seeing all the experience and hearing the words and being inspired, that just builds within you an emotion, and you kind of say, yeah, I want to do that.
Yeah, after the telling of the things regarding the taking care of, and then the fact that they see, what happens. It says in verse 3 of 24, Moses came and recounted to the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances, and all the people answered in one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has spoken we will do. Okay, so Mitch, I think, has got a good point. He's saying, they're kind of caught up in the emotion. Is that a bad thing? I don't think it's a bad thing. Anyone got any other ideas on this? Why are they so prepared to say this, and yet we know how the story usually goes. It's not too long until they're not really believing that. Go ahead, Barbara.
Part of it could be that when God says, I'm going to do everything for you, it's like, well, we're just going to sit back. We don't have to do anything.
Okay.
And so it's going to be so easy, and we're not going to have any problems. And the first time the problem comes around.
Okay, that could be interesting. This is going to be a great deal. We've got ourselves made here. All you got to do is read what God has just promised us. So it may be that they haven't really, maybe caught up in the emotion, which I think Mitch makes a pretty good point there. I mean, they're going, wow, this is amazing. But maybe to add what Barbara says is that maybe they haven't really considered, what's going to be expected of them. And they don't always do all that good in that regard. Yeah, Mona?
This is more their style anyway, because when they're in captivity, everything was done for them, and they were
Yeah.
somewhat successful. So this is more of the God that we wanted.
Sure.
He's going to do everything for them.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because they've been used to not worrying about what they're supposed to do, generally speaking, because someone's always telling them what to do. And they're kind of trapped in that situation. But here they're not trapped, but at the same time, what's been their feeling after they've left over there? About whether they'd still like to be there or not. Yeah, it wasn't so bad there. We had all the food we needed. So, that's part of, what they're thinking about. The reason I want you to think about this is I just think about, how do you get to this point? And then when something comes along that just doesn't make it fulfilling to you and to those around you, that you just fall apart. I mean, would it have been better if they hadn't made this promise? Because we know that they, in the end, they don't mean it. But that's not true. I don't know. They could mean that right now. Who am I to say that they didn't mean it when they said it? Now, there may be evidence to indicate that they were going to forget about it very soon. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay. Go ahead. What?
I was going to use the example of Peter, because, Peter was very resolute and
Okay.
never going to do the things when Christ told him, you're going to deny me. Oh, I would never do that.
Right.
Yet when confronted with fear,
Right.
he did. And
Right.
I think that's what the children of Israel, they were, yes, we're resolved to keep the commandments, but then when they were faced with fear, when they had to confront it in battle or whatever,
Sure.
fear took over.
Yeah, maybe a little different. I'm trying to picture, where, Peter is in his whole experience. They've certainly seen God do major works through Jesus, so we know that there shouldn't be any question as to his power. But I think, there are situations where maybe, going back to Barbara's point, you haven't really thought it through, what this is going to mean. And so you're making big promises, but come on now, it's going to get really tough. And they haven't really come to face that, it would seem. Anyone else on this? I just think this is kind of an interesting point because, when we start going through this account, because we usually see them go from one part here, not so faithful, to, man, oh man, this is great, we're just going to keep doing it. And I think, in all honesty, we're probably a little bit more like this than we really are willing to admit. And that's the other place I come to, is that, hey, now wait a minute. Are there times when I'm just thinking, man, this is really, really good. God's with us. We're going to get this done. And then all of a sudden, what happens? It doesn't turn out exactly like I expect it's going to turn out. And then all of a sudden, that guy who was just so excited and so inspired by God's word is not living according to it. And I think it's again, we look at these people, they're such an easy target in so many ways. But you think about this, if all of us, this is almost funny to me, but okay guys, we're all going to Fresno, okay? And I want you to meet outside, no cars allowed. We're all going to walk up there all together. And see, Teresa's already saying she ain't going. She's shaking her head back there. But think about that. It's spoken like, I won't say like, I don't want to be sexist in this, but Dana said, she goes, wait a minute, I have to change my shoes. But I think about that. This is 600,000 people, and getting those people all organized and what that must have been like. Then I'm thinking, okay, guys, well, how about us? Because, we're thinking, we got to deal with that, those issues. So, this is a challenge that these people are facing, and I can see when they have all this, quote, freedom in their own way as they've left Egypt, that all of a sudden, when we start talking about the meaning of freedom, a lot of people, when it comes to the government, they want the government to tell them what to do, because it's just easier that way. But what about people who have freedom? Well, that's challenging. So I just find this very fascinating that these are individuals who are so willing to say that. And the thing was that, going back to Mitch, if I would have seen and witnessed what they had seen, I would have been charged up too. What do you want me to do, God? They've seen, what's going up on the mountain, the noise and the cloud and all those things. Anyway, think about it. Okay, let's skip on down to verse 6. What might we learn from a comparison of chapter 21, verse 2, and Hebrews 4, 16 and 7 through 19? Now, I don't know if it's actually connected or not, but I'm thinking it might be. But if you don't think it is, that's okay with me. But what are they told there in verse 2? Moses alone, however, shall come near to the Lord, but they shall not come near. nor shall the people come up with him. Okay, in this particular situation, under the law of Moses, and certainly with Moses as the one who was to go up and get the law and bring it back down to the people, he was the only one to do that. All right, now, most people then weren't allowed to come near to God. In fact, it was a very fearful experience for the most part. But when you go over and read Hebrews, chapter 4, verse 16, and 7, verse 19, the emphasis is on the other side. Now, I want you to maybe help me with, okay, what's the improvement here? Let's see, Dave, why don't you? Well, Mark, you look like you're looking hard at something, so I'll really confuse you and ask you to read something. Okay. Okay, read it in Hebrews, chapter 4, verse 16. And Richard, you can read 7:19. Okay, you go first, Mark.
Therefore, let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need.
Okay, so one of the great things about being in Christ now is that we're promised we can engage the throne. We can come near to this almighty splendor. Okay, Rich, 7:19.
For the law made nothing perfect. And on the other hand, there is a bringing in of a better hope, through which we draw near to God.
Okay, and we sing about it, don't we? All right, I just think that's a comparison that's worthy of at least of consideration. I don't think there's any specific connection. It's not one of those ones where the Hebrew writer says, and this is being compared to what happened when the law of Moses was given. However, with just that in mind, I think in question number 7, it says, what did Moses receive from God and how did the people respond? Well, we've already noticed that. All right, now, so some amazing things have been going on, but it had not eliminated the people's fear of God. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't fear God and we shouldn't respect God, because, I mean, I think, as we notice here about, if you were in the presence of God, it was a very intimidating experience. But now we're told that we don't have to have that kind of fear because of what was accomplished by Jesus. So we are told we can draw near now. It's not like Moses going up on the mountain and he's the only one who can go up there and engage God. So what do you think? Okay, I didn't mean to get you all stirred up there and start, pushing your hands up there. But, you want to say something, Dave? Okay. I thought I might squeeze it out of you, Dave. I saw you moving your whiskers a little bit. So, go ahead, Carrie.
Chapter 12 of Hebrews, for you have not come to the mountain that may be touched and that burned with fire, to blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of the trumpet and the voice of words, so that those who heard it beg that the word should not be spoken for them or to them anymore, for they could not endure what was commanded. So they could go the mountain, but we do.
Yeah.
We're not in their position. We have fellowship with the Father himself.
Yeah, and it's all because of what was initially established in the old law. It's so we can learn about the awfulness of God. But through Christ, we are now able to engage God. And I think it's a pretty worthy comparison, and most of you have seen it and you've made that kind of comparison before, as I know I have. But let me just look now quickly at, I say compare John 18 with Exodus 24, 9 through 11, and Exodus 33, 18 through 23. Now, in John 1:18, what does it say? If you've turned it over and you've got it, please read it.
No one has seen God at any time, the only begotten God who is in the bosom of the Father. He has explained him.
Yeah. So it seems pretty straightforward there. Nobody's seen God. All right, now, but what we have here, we have in these particular instances something I wouldn't say is necessarily contrasting it, but it seems to require some sort of explanation. Okay, so read 24, 9 through 11. Let's see. Dave Stitt, read that, please.
Say it again.
24, 9 through 11. Mm-hmm.
Then Moses went up, also Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. And they saw the God of Israel. And there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone. And it was like the very heavens in its clarity. But on the nobles of the children of Israel he did not lay his hand. So they saw God, and they ate and drank.
Okay. All right, so now how would you, I'm asking you to try to explain this because this is one of those age-old questions. I mean, what is there about what Dave just read that might lead you to think that this isn't necessarily the true essence of God, but something else? Well, what's he see at his feet? Jewels. Okay, and so it seems that, again, God manifests himself in a certain way where we're very, very impressed, but we're not seeing God because we know no one has seen God. In fact, when you get over to Exodus 33, this is the one maybe that's the most interesting. Exodus 33, 18 through 23. Let's see. Kate, could you read that? Kate Jones? Those 5 verses?
And Moses said, "Show me your glory." And the Lord said, "I will make all my goodness pass before your face, and I will proclaim the Lord by name before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. I will show mercy to whom I will show mercy." But he added, "You cannot see my face, for no one can see me and live." The Lord said, "Here is a place by me. You will station yourself on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and will cover you with my hand while I pass by. Then I will take away my hand, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen."
Okay, so now what does that tell us about not being able to see God and live? So what conclusion might you draw here from this event? This is one of those ones where Moses really wanted to see God. I mean, there was one of those points in time where he needs to really be encouraged. And so he wants to see God. And God says, no, you can't do that. He does say, if you can't look upon my face, right? But what does he say he'll allow him to do? You could, whatever that means, to see his back. I'm not sure I completely understand it, but nevertheless, that's what it says. And then, of course, when you look over in Isaiah, that's Isaiah's experience of being in the presence of God. And it's pretty obvious to me there that he's having some sort of vision. In fact, it's called a vision. So I think we can leave that at there. But I just want us to all understand this, that, yeah, there certainly is something about God that we can't see and we cannot behold it and survive. But there are certain situations where things arise where God allows people to be impressed with his being. Anybody want to disagree with that or have a better explanation for it? You guys are all thinking, it's 1 minute till we quit here. I think we can wait him out. Go ahead, Mitch.
In Exodus 33, God says he'll be gracious, and we be gracious and show compassion. We must show compassion. So he wanted to be gracious and honor Moses for
Yeah.
to see his glory, but also be compassionate enough to show him his face and show him.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There's a way that people can see through Scripture. We see visions and different things that God can reveal his glory, but he does it through grace and then also through compassion. So
Right.
you don't see the full-on face of God because no one can see that clearly.
Right. And I mean, I don't know how else to put those passages all together other than to draw the conclusion that you have, Mitch. So I appreciate that. I'd like for us next time, we'll go ahead and do question 9 and 10. They're pretty important because these are a couple of links with the Old Testament to the New Testament, 1 and 2 Corinthians, as far as the glory of God. And we see a lot of evidence of the glory of God there with Moses, and then also the idea of the blood and the significance it had then and what it has now. So we'll wait for that, and I'll just try to tack that on to the questions I have for next week. Okay? All right. Dave Ormeron, would you lead us in a prayer, please? Just thanks.
Our Father, we're so thankful for this time that we've had together to study your word. Pray that you would help us to take these lessons from the past and apply them to our lives. Help us to treat one another as you want us to love our enemies and to serve one another. Help us as we go through this next week. Help us to remain faithful to you in every endeavor. So in your name we pray.
Amen. Thanks for participating, guys. I really do appreciate it.